I have spent 23 years managing estates for families whose wealth spans generations. But I have never spoken about what happened during the winter of 1996 in Montauk. The Whitmore family owned a sprawling oceanfront property there, a place they used only during summer months when the social season demanded their presence among the Hampton elite. The rest of the year, the estate remained shuttered, its 47 rooms silent beneath dust covers, waiting for my monthly inspections. That December, Mrs. Catherine Whitmore called with an unusual request. Her adult son, Jonathan, had been asking about spending Christmas alone at the Montauk house. She wanted me to ensure everything was properly prepared, though she seemed reluctant to explain why he suddenly needed solitude. Jonathan was 34 then, heir to a textile fortune that had built the family's prominence since 1878. I had known him since he was 21, and he had never shown interest in the isolated winter estate. The house sat on 12 acres overlooking the Atlantic, its Victorian architecture weathered by decades of salt air and storms. Built in 1889 by Jonathan's great-grandfather, it featured the kind of elaborate design that wealthy families favoured in that era. Tower rooms, wraparound porches, and an attic with 6 dormer windows facing different directions. The eastern window, the one that faced the ocean, had been sealed shut since 1943 for reasons the family never discussed. I arrived on December 15th to prepare the house, expecting a routine opening of a seasonal residence. The heating system activated properly, the electricity hummed to life, and the rooms slowly warmed from their winter chill. Something felt different as I walked through the house that first afternoon. The silence seemed heavier than usual, as if the empty rooms were holding their breath. I had opened dozens of estates over the years, but the Montauk house carried a weight that other properties did not. Perhaps it was the isolation, surrounded by bare trees and grey December skies. Or maybe the knowledge that no one had lived there for 6 months. I began my standard checklist, checking pipes for freeze damage, testing windows for proper seals, ensuring the furnace was distributing heat evenly throughout the sprawling structure. The ground floor contained the formal living areas, kitchen, library, and staff quarters. The second floor housed 8 bedrooms, including the master suite that overlooked the ocean. The third floor held storage rooms and the sealed attic space that the family never mentioned. While inspecting the second floor bedrooms, I noticed that the eastern windows offered clear views of the attic's dormer windows above. The sealed window was easy to identify. Its glass had been painted black from the inside, creating a dark rectangle that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the weak winter light. I had never questioned this detail before, accepting it as another quirk of old estate management. The Whitmore family maintained many traditions that seemed odd to outsiders, but were treated as sacred within their household. Meals served at precisely specific times, certain rooms that remained locked except for cleaning, particular pieces of art that were never moved from their designated positions. The sealed window was simply another family rule to follow. Jonathan arrived on December 20th, carrying only a small leather suitcase and a wooden box I did not recognise. He seemed thinner than when I had last seen him at the family's Manhattan residence in September, his face carrying a tension that had not been there before. When I offered to help with his belongings, he declined politely but firmly, keeping the wooden box close to his chest. "I need to be alone here," he told me as we stood in the entrance hall. Complete privacy. No staff, no visitors, no interruptions. His voice carried an edge of desperation that I had never heard from any member of the Whitmore family. They were accustomed to requesting rather than pleading. I assured him that I would respect his wishes and asked only that he contact me if any issues arose with the house systems. The estate was well maintained, but winter storms could cause unexpected problems with heating or electricity. He nodded absently, already turning toward the staircase that led to the upper floors. "The attic," he said suddenly, stopping with his foot on the first step. "Has anyone been up there recently?" I explained that I cleaned the accessible storage areas twice yearly, but that the sealed section had remained untouched since my employment began. His shoulders relaxed slightly at this information. After ensuring that the kitchen was stocked with sufficient supplies for his stay, I departed, leaving Jonathan alone in the vast house. The sun was setting as I drove away, casting long shadows across the snow-covered grounds, and I noticed that lights were already appearing in several downstairs windows. 3 days passed without word from Jonathan, which was not unusual given his request for solitude. On December 23rd, however, I received a phone call that changed everything. MR's. Whitmore's voice trembled as she spoke from her residence in Manhattan. "Has anyone else been at the Montauk house?" she asked without preamble. "Any workers, delivery people, unexpected visitors?" I assured her that no one had visited the estate since Jonathan's arrival. The property was isolated enough that any approaching vehicle would be visible from the house, and the staff entrance required a key that only family members and I possessed. "Jonathan called me this morning," she continued. "He said someone has been opening the eastern attic window at night. He can see it from his bedroom window, but when he goes outside to investigate, it's closed again." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "That window has been sealed for 53 years. There is no mechanism to open it from inside the attic. I volunteered to drive out immediately to investigate, but she stopped me. He specifically requested that no one disturb him. But I need to know, is there any way someone could be accessing the attic from outside the house?" I walked through the property's layout in my mind. The attic space was 40 feet above ground level, accessible only through a narrow staircase from the second floor. The sealed window faced the ocean, where rough terrain and winter storms would make any external approach extremely dangerous. MRs. Whitmore thanked me but ended the call abruptly, leaving me with questions that would disturb my sleep for the next several nights. Christmas Eve brought a severe winter storm that battered the entire Montauk Peninsula. I spent the day monitoring weather reports and preparing for potential emergency calls from clients whose properties might suffer damage from the high winds and heavy snow. The Whitmore estate, with its exposed oceanfront location, was particularly vulnerable to storm-related problems. At 9:47 that evening, my phone rang. Jonathan's voice was barely audible over the sound of howling wind. "The window," he said. "It's open again. And this time there's light coming from inside the attic." I could hear fear in his voice, something I had never associated with any member of his family. "I can see someone moving up there." I grabbed my emergency kit and drove toward Montauk despite the dangerous conditions. The road was nearly impassable, covered with snow and debris from fallen branches. It took me almost 2 hours to reach the estate, and when I finally arrived, the house stood like a dark monument against the storm-lashed sky. Jonathan met me at the door before I could ring the bell. His face was pale, his hair dishevelled, and his hands shook as he led me inside. "Look," he said, pointing toward a second-floor window that faced the eastern side of the house. Through the glass, I could see the attic's dormer window, and it was indeed open. A soft, golden light emanated from within, casting long rectangles of illumination across the snow-covered ground below. "There," Jonathan whispered. "Do you see the shadow moving across the light?" I strained my eyes against the storm, and for a moment I thought I glimpsed something shifting within the illuminated space. We stood watching the window for nearly 30 minutes, but the shadow I thought I had seen did not reappear. The light remained steady, however, glowing with the warm quality of candlelight rather than electric illumination. Jonathan explained that the window had first opened to nights earlier, always after darkness fell, always accompanied by that same gentle light. "I've tried to access the attic," he said as we continued our vigil. The door at the top of the stairs has been locked since I was a child. But yesterday I found the key in my great-grandfather's desk. He pulled an ornate brass key from his pocket, its surface green with age. When I tried to open the door, it wouldn't turn. It's as if the lock has been sealed somehow. The storm was intensifying, making it difficult to maintain clear sight of the attic window. Snow struck the glass in sheets, and the wind created a constant roar that seemed to shake the entire house. Yet the lalai, min the never flick, never Jim maintain it, explodes outside. At exactly midnight, the light went out. We watched as the window slowly closed, its movement smooth and deliberate despite the lack of any visible mechanism. Within moments, the dormer window appeared exactly as it had for 53 years sealed. Painted black, reflecting nothing. Jonathan turned to me with exhaustion etched across his features. "This is why I came here," he said quietly. "I need to know what's in that room. My mother won't speak about it. My father avoided this house entirely after 1943, and the staff who worked here during that time have all passed away. The following morning brought clear skies and bitter cold." Jonathan and I examined the exterior of the house, looking for any sign of how someone might access the third floor from outside. The eastern side of the building faced a steep slope that dropped toward the ocean, and the attic window was positioned well beyond the reach of any ladder or climbing equipment. More importantly, the snow around the house showed no footprints except our own from the previous evening. If someone had been climbing to that window, they would have left traces in the soft snow that had accumulated during the storm. The ground beneath the eastern side was particularly undisturbed, showing only the smooth surface created by wind-blown snow. "Show me the attic access," I requested. Jonathan led me to the third floor, where a narrow hallway ended at a heavy wooden door marked with elaborate brass hardware. The door itself was beautiful, clearly original to the house's construction, but it had obviously not been opened in many years. Paint had sealed the edges where the door met the frame, and dust covered the ornate handle. Jonathan inserted the key and turned it slowly. The lock clicked, but when he tried to push the door open, it refused to budge. He applied more pressure, and I added my weight to his effort, but the door remained firmly closed. It was as if something on the other side was preventing it from opening. "This is on yesterday. Jonathan drawing the key. The lock opens, but the door won't move." He studied my face carefully. "What do you think is preventing it from opening?" That afternoon, I returned to my office and began researching the history of the Whitmore estate. The family's records were extensive, but information about the period around 1943 was notably sparse. I found references to Jonathan's great-grandfather, Edmund Whitmore, who had built the house and lived there until his death in 1944. Edmund had been a complicated man, according to the documents I discovered. He had made his fortune in textile manufacturing, but had also been deeply interested in what the records delicately termed spiritual investigations. He had hosted seances at the Montauk house, invited mediums and spiritualists to conduct sessions in various rooms, and had apparently believed that the house's position overlooking the ocean made it particularly suitable for communication with deceased family members. The sealed window began to make sense when I found a letter written by Edmund's son, Jonathan's grandfather, to the family's attorney in 1944. The letter mentioned disturbing events in the attic space and requested that the room be permanently closed to prevent further incidents. The eastern window was to be sealed. To ensure that no light could escape or enter that space, what kinds of incidents would prompt such drastic action? The letter offered no details, referring only to manifestations that proved too dangerous to continue. It mentioned that Edmund had died suddenly after spending several nights alone in the attic, but the exact circumstances of his death were not described. I began to understand why Jonathan had come to the house alone. He was searching for answers about his family's history, answers that had been deliberately concealed for more than 50 years. I called Jonathan that evening to share what I had discovered. His response was immediate and intense. "I knew there was something about my great-grandfather's death," he said. "My mother has never been willing to discuss it, and she becomes visibly upset whenever anyone mentions the Montauk house during winter months." He paused, and I could hear him moving around the house. "The window opened again last night, exactly at midnight. But this time anything else. Footsteps. Someone was walking around up there for almost an hour." His voice carried a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm going to find a way into that room tomorrow," I advised caution, reminding him that the family had sealed the space for what they clearly believed were good reasons. But Jonathan had inherited the Whitmore determination that had built the family fortune, and I knew he would not abandon his investigation regardless of potential dangers. "There's something else," he added. "I found more information about the key. It wasn't just for the attic door. According to a journal I discovered in my great-grandfather's desk. He had special locks installed throughout the house in 1942. The same key opens multiple doors, including some that I haven't been able to locate yet. After ending our call, I spent the evening researching Edmund Whitmore's interest in spiritualism. The 1940s had been a period of intense interest in supernatural phenomena, particularly among wealthy individuals who had the resources to pursue elaborate investigations. Many prominent families had hosted seances and employed mediums, viewing such activities as sophisticated entertainments rather than dangerous practices. The next morning, Jonathan called with excitement in his voice. "I found another door," he announced, "behind the bookshelf in the library. The same key opened a passage that leads directly to the attic space, bypassing the sealed door entirely." His words sent a chill through me, though I could not explain why. He had discovered the hidden door while examining the library's eastern wall, the same side of the house as the mysterious window. The bookshelf was mounted on hinges and swung aside to reveal a narrow staircase that climbed steeply into darkness. The passage had clearly been designed for concealment, its entrance invisible when the bookshelf was properly positioned. "I'm going up," Jonathan declared. "Tonight, when the window opens. I want to see what's been causing the light and the sounds." I strongly urged him to wait until I could join him, but he was adamant about proceeding alone. "This is family business," he sighed firmly. "Something my great-grandfather started that I need to finish that afternoon." I drove to Montauk despite Jonathan's instructions to stay away. The responsibility I felt for his safety outweighed my respect for his wishes. The winter day was ending early, with sunset arriving before 5 o'clock, and I wanted to be nearby in case he encountered whatever had prompted his family to seal that room decades earlier. I parked at a distance from the house and waited, watching the eastern side of the building for any sign of the mysterious light. The dormer window remained dark as the hours passed, but I noticed that other windows in the house were illuminated, suggesting that Jonathan was moving through different rooms as he prepared for his investigation. At 11:55, I saw Jonathan's silhouette appear at a second-floor window. He was watching the attic, waiting for the phenomenon to begin. I focused my attention on the sealed dormer window, though the distance made it difficult to observe clearly. Precisely at midnight, the window opened. The movement was smooth and silent, despite the old hardware that should have created noise after decades of disuse. The golden light appeared immediately, casting its warm glow across the snow-covered ground below. From my position, I could see into a portion of the attic space, though the angle limited my view. What I saw made no logical sense. The attic appeared to be furnished as a study or library, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large desk positioned near the eastern window. Candles provided the illumination, their flames dancing in what should have been a drafty, cold space. But most disturbing was the figure seated at the desk. An elderly man was writing in a large book, his movements deliberate and focused. He wore clothing that seemed to belong to an earlier era, and his white hair caught the candlelight as he worked. Every few moments, he would pause to look up from his writing, gazing out the window toward the ocean as if he were watching for something specific. I knew immediately that I was looking at Edmund Whitmore, though he had died more than 50 years earlier. The family resemblance was unmistakable, and his presence in that sealed room explained why the space had been closed for so long. Jonathan was about to confront something that his family had been unable to resolve for decades. I watched in horror as Jonathan's figure disappeared from the second-floor window, presumably heading toward the hidden passage in the library. Every instinct told me to intervene, but I was too far from the house to reach him quickly, and I had no way to access the building without alerting him to my presence. The figure in the attic continued writing, apparently unaware that someone was approaching through the concealed staircase. The candles provided enough light for me to observe his methodical movements as he filled page after page with what appeared to be continuous text. Occasionally he would set down his pen and turn toward the window, staring out at the dark ocean with an expression of profound sadness. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. I began to see movement in the shadows behind the main figure, suggesting that the attic contained more than just Edmund Whitmore's presence. Shapes shifted along the walls, too indistinct to identify clearly, but substantial enough to block portions of the candlelight as they moved. At 12:37, everything changed. The writing figure suddenly looked up from his book and turned toward the interior of the room, as if someone had entered the space. His expression shifted from sadness to alarm, and he rose quickly from his chair. The candles began to flicker more violently, their light creating dancing shadows that made it difficult to track the movements within the attic. I could see that a conversation was taking place, though I was too distant to hear any words. The elderly figure gestured emphatically, pointing first toward the open window and then toward the desk where he had been writing. His body language suggested urgency, as if he were trying to communicate something crucial. The interaction in the attic became increasingly animated. Edmund Whitmore moved around the room with surprising energy for someone who had been dead for 53 years, gathering books and papers as if preparing to show them to his visitor. The shadows that moved along the walls seemed to grow more active as well, clustering around the desk area where the most intense conversation appeared to be taking place. At one point, the elderly figure approached the window and looked directly down at the ground below. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, though logic suggested that a ghost would not be concerned with spotting observers. His gaze lingered on the area where I was concealed, and for a moment I felt certain he was aware of my presence. The candlelight began to dim, creating an increasingly eerie atmosphere within the attic space. What had begun as warm, golden illumination slowly shifted toward a colder, bluer quality that made the figures within appear more ethereal and less substantial. The shadows on the walls became more defined, revealing themselves to be additional human figures, all dressed in clothing from different historical periods. I realized I was witnessing some kind of gathering, a meeting that had been taking place in that sealed room for decades. Edmund Whitmore was not alone in his supernatural residence. He had been joined by others, perhaps family members who had died over the years and found themselves drawn to the same space. The implications were staggering. The Whitmore family had not simply sealed an empty room, they had imprisoned a congregation of their deceased relatives, locking them away from the living world but unable to help them move on to whatever lay beyond. At exactly 1:15 in the morning, the gathering in the attic reached what appeared to be a climactic moment. All the figures, both the solid presence of Edmund and the more shadowy others, turned toward the same area of the room. They seemed to be listening to someone or something that I could not observe from my position. The candlelight flared suddenly, becoming bright enough to illuminate the entire attic space clearly. For the first time, I could see the full scope of what the room contained. The walls were covered with portraits, dozens of paintings depicting members of the Whitmore family from different generations. But these were not ordinary portraits. The painted figures appeared to be moving, turning their heads to watch the supernatural gathering below. Books and papers covered every available surface, suggesting decades of continuous research and documentation. Edmund had apparently been recording his experiences in the afterlife, creating a comprehensive account of what happened to consciousness after death. The implications were both fascinating and terrifying. Most disturbing was the realization that Jonathan was somewhere in that space, witnessing events that no living person should experience. The supernatural figures were treating him as an honoured guest rather than an intruder, which suggested that his presence had been anticipated, perhaps even planned. Ati vertigantu fade. The figures in the attic moved toward the window, as if preparing to conclude their gathering. Edmund Whitmore returned to his desk one final time, adding several lines to whatever document he had been composing throughout the evening. His movements suggested satisfaction, as if an important communication had been successfully completed. The window began to close at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, but not before I glimpsed Jonathan emerging from the shadows near the back of the attic. He appeared unharmed but profoundly changed, his posture and movements suggesting someone who had received information that fundamentally altered his understanding of the world. As the light dimmed and the window sealed itself once again, I saw him approach Edmund's desk. The elderly figure handed him something, a book or folder, before stepping back with what appeared to be a gesture of farewell. The transaction lasted only moments before darkness consumed the attic space. I waited nearly an hour before approaching the house, wanting to ensure that whatever supernatural activity had occurred was completely finished. When I finally knocked on the front door, Jonathan answered immediately, as if he had been expecting me. His appearance was striking. Though clearly exhausted, his face carried an expression of profound relief, as if a burden he had carried for years had finally been lifted. The tension that had marked his features since his arrival at the estate had vanished, replaced by a calm certainty that seemed almost otherworldly. "You saw them," he said without preamble. It was not a question. "You were watching from the trees." I admitted that I had been concerned for his safety and had remained nearby despite his instructions. He nodded approvingly, as if my presence had been part of some larger plan. "My great-grandfather has been waiting for me," Jonathan explained as he led me into the library. "For 53 years, he has been trying to complete something that he started before his death. Tonight, I was finally able to help him finish it." Jonathan showed me the book that Edmund had given him. It was a leather-bound journal filled with handwritten pages documenting what appeared to be communications with deceased family members dating back to the 1870s. The entries were detailed accounts of conversations, revelations, and instructions passed from the dead to the living across multiple generations. "The Whitmore family has always had what my great-grandfather called the sight," Jonathan explained as I examined the extraordinary document. "The ability to perceive and communicate with those who have passed on." But Edmund was the first to attempt systematic documentation of these experiences. The journal revealed that the attic had been converted into a specialized space for supernatural communication in 1942. When Edmund became convinced that deceased family members were trying to convey important information about business dealings, family relationships, and unresolved emotional matters. The eastern window had been designed as a focal point for these communications, positioned to capture specific atmospheric conditions that seemed to enhance spiritual activity. "The family sealed the room after Edmund's death because they were afraid," Jonathan continued. "They could hear voices and see lights, but they couldn't understand what was being communicated. They thought it was dangerous, but it was actually quite the opposite. Edmund had found a way to maintain connections across the boundary between life and death. I studied the journal's most recent entries, which described Edmund's growing frustration with his inability to complete his documentation. He had been waiting for a family member with sufficient spiritual sensitivity to receive his final revelations and ensure that his work would be preserved for future generations. The journal contained specific instructions that Edmund had developed over decades of supernatural research. He had identified certain times of year, atmospheric conditions, and lunar phases that created optimal circumstances for communication between the living and the dead. The winter solstice period, particularly the week between December 20th and January 1st, provided the most reliable opportunities for extended contact. "That's why I came here now," Jonathan explained. "I've been having dreams about this place since September. Dreams where my great-grandfather was trying to tell me something. The dreams became more vivid and specific as winter approached, until I finally understood that he needed me to come here during the solstice period." The journal also revealed why the window had been sealed in 1943. Edmund's son, Jonathan's grandfather, had attempted to continue the communications after his father's death, but had been overwhelmed by the intensity of the supernatural activity. Multiple spirits had begun appearing simultaneously, creating a chaotic situation that the family could not control or understand. They sealed the window and locked the door because they thought it would stop the communications, Jonathan continued. But they didn't realise that Edmund had designed the space to maintain its own spiritual energy. He continued his research from the other side, waiting for someone who could properly understand and document what he had discovered. I began to understand the profound nature of what had occurred. The Whitmore family had stumbled onto something extraordinary in their attempts to communicate with their deceased relatives, but fear had prevented them from exploring its full potential. Edmund had spent 53 years in a kind of spiritual limbo, unable to complete his work without assistance from the living. Jonathan explained that the gathering I had witnessed was a formal transfer of responsibility. Edmund had been training him throughout the evening, showing him how to maintain the spiritual communications that had become central to the Whitmore family's supernatural legacy. The other figures in the attic were family members who had joined Edmund after their deaths, creating a council of deceased relatives who continued to influence family decisions from beyond the grave. "They've been trying to guide the family for decades," Jonathan said as he carefully closed the journal. "Business investments, marriage decisions, even choices about where to live, all of it has been influenced by advice from our deceased relatives, but without proper communication channels. Their guidance was often misunderstood or ignored entirely. The revelation explained many aspects of the Whitmore family's remarkable success over multiple generations. What had appeared to be exceptional business acumen and family unity was actually the result of continued guidance from deceased family members who maintained their concern for their living descendants' welfare. Edmund showed me how to maintain the communications," Jonathan continued. "The window will continue to open during appropriate periods, and I'll be able to receive guidance from the family council. But now the communications will be properly documented and understood rather than feared." He paused, studying my reaction carefully. "I need someone I can trust to help maintain this legacy. Someone who understands estate management and can ensure that future generations will have access to this resource." His meaning was clear. He was offering me a role in maintaining one of the most extraordinary supernatural phenomena I had ever encountered. The implications of Jonathan's offer were staggering. I would become part of a system that had operated in secret for over 50 years, helping to maintain communications between the living and the dead within one of America's most prominent families. The responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. What exactly would this involve? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Jonathan opened the journal to a section that contained detailed instructions for maintaining the attic space, scheduling communication sessions, and documenting the guidance received from deceased family members. The space requires specific preparations before each communication period, he explained. Certain candles must be lit in particular arrangements. Mirrors must be positioned to capture and redirect spiritual energy. And the eastern window must be opened at precisely calculated times based on lunar phases and atmospheric conditions. The journal contained charts showing optimal communication periods for each month of the year, along with detailed notes about which deceased family members were most likely to appear during different seasons. Edmund had discovered that his own father communicated most clearly during autumn months, while his deceased wife preferred spring evenings when ocean conditions were particularly calm. There's also the matter of secrecy, Jonathan added seriously. The family has maintained this legacy for generations, but always with absolute discretion. The general public would never understand or accept what we've discovered here. He looked at me intently. Can I trust you to maintain that confidentiality? I found myself agreeing before I had fully considered the implications. The opportunity to be involved with such an extraordinary phenomenon outweighed my concerns about the potential risks or responsibilities. Jonathan spent the remainder of that night teaching me the basics of spiritual communication as Edmund had taught him. We returned to the attic through the hidden passage, and I experienced firsthand the otherworldly atmosphere that pervaded the sealed space. The room was exactly as I had observed from outside, furnished as an elegant study with books, papers, and research materials covering every surface. The air felt different from the rest of the house, charged with an energy that seemed to vibrate just beyond the edge of normal perception. Shadows moved independently of any light sources, and sounds echoed from areas where no one was standing. The key is to remain calm and respectful, Jonathan instructed as we arranged the candles according to Edmund's specifications. They're family members, not hostile spirits. They want to help, but they need to know that we're serious about maintaining their legacy properly. The eastern window opened at midnight exactly, without any physical mechanism that I could identify. The December air should have flooded the room with bitter cold, but instead the temperature remained comfortable, as if the supernatural energy created its own climate control system. Edmund appeared almost immediately, his figure more solid and distinct than it had appeared from my distant observation point. He acknowledged my presence with a formal nod before turning his attention to Jonathan, speaking in a voice that seemed to come from both everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Edmund reviewed the journal's contents, provided additional instructions for maintaining the communication system, and introduced me to other family members who materialized throughout the evening. The most remarkable aspect of the supernatural gathering was the normalcy of the interactions. These were not the terrifying manifestations that popular culture associates with ghostly encounters. Instead, they were family members maintaining their relationships with living descendants, offering advice and guidance just as they had done during their lifetimes. Edmund's wife, Charlotte, appeared shortly after midnight, bringing with her a gentle warmth that seemed to fill the entire attic space. She expressed concern about Jonathan's decision to remain unmarried, offering suggestions about suitable partners from families that would understand and support the Whitmore legacy. Her advice was both practical and loving, delivered with the same tone she might have used during a family dinner. Jonathan's great-uncle Robert materialized near the research desk, eager to discuss business investments and economic trends that he had been monitoring from his supernatural perspective. His insights were surprisingly current and detailed. suggesting that the deceased maintained awareness of contemporary world events rather than being frozen in the time of their deaths. The gathering continued until nearly 3 in the morning, with various family members appearing and disappearing as they contributed to discussions about family matters, business decisions, and the proper maintenance of the communication system. Each spirit maintained distinctive personality traits and concerns that reflected their interests during life. As the session concluded, Edmund handed me a separate journal that contained instructions specifically designed for estate managers and other trusted assistants. The responsibility was being formally transferred to include me as a guardian of the family's supernatural legacy, a role that would continue for as long as I remained in their employment. The window closed at exactly 3:15, marking the end of my first formal communication session with the deceased members of the Whitmore family. The experience left me simultaneously exhilarated and exhausted, filled with wonder at what I had witnessed, but also aware of the enormous responsibility that had been placed upon me. Jonathan and I spent the rest of the night reviewing the journals and planning how to integrate the supernatural communications into the family's ongoing business and personal decisions. The system Edmund had developed was remarkably sophisticated, providing structured methods for asking questions, receiving guidance, and documenting the advice for future reference. The family council meets every 2 weeks during winter months, Jonathan explained as we organise the research materials. Less frequently during other seasons, but they're always available during times of crisis or major decision-making. The eastern window serves as both a symbol and a practical tool for maintaining the connection. He showed me detailed charts that tracked which deceased family members were most helpful for different types of decisions. Edmund handled matters related to property and estate management. Charlotte specialised in family relationships and social connections. Robert focused on business and financial investments, and several other relatives contributed expertise in their areas of particular knowledge or interest. Tomorrow, I'll call my mother and explain what we've discovered, Jonathan continued. She'd be relieved to know that the communications are not dangerous but beneficial. The family has been missing decades of valuable guidance because they were afraid of something they didn't understand. I realised that my life had fundamentally changed. I was no longer simply an estate manager. I had become a guardian of one of the most extraordinary secrets in American high society. The following morning brought a winter landscape transformed by the storm, but inside the Montauk house, everything felt different as well. The oppressive atmosphere that had characterised the estate during my previous visits had been replaced by a sense of warmth and welcome that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Jonathan contacted his mother shortly after breakfast, and I could hear her relieved sobs through the telephone receiver as he explained what had transpired during his stay. The fear that had haunted the family for 5 decades was finally being replaced by understanding and acceptance of their unique spiritual legacy, MRs. Whitmore requested that I remain at the estate through New Year's Day to help Jonathan document the communication system and ensure that all security measures were properly established. The family was committed to maintaining absolute secrecy about their supernatural abilities while also ensuring that future generations would have access to the guidance of their deceased relatives. We'll need to modify the estate's security systems, Jonathan explained as we walked through the house. The attic space requires specific environmental controls, and we need to ensure that no unauthorized persons can access the area during communication sessions. The hidden passage in the library would remain the primary access route, with additional security measures to prevent accidental discovery. Over the next several days, I helped Jonathan establish protocols for scheduling communication sessions, maintaining the research materials, and documenting the guidance received from deceased family members. The system was designed to operate for generations, ensuring that the Whitmore family's supernatural legacy would continue to benefit their living descendants while remaining hidden from the outside world. I left the Montauk estate on January 2nd, 1997, carrying with me knowledge that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and the continuing bonds that connect families across generations. The sealed window that had once seemed ominous now appeared as a doorway to extraordinary possibilities. The Whitmore family's supernatural legacy continued to flourish under Jonathan's guidance. He married within 2 years, choosing a partner recommended by his deceased great-aunt who had observed the young woman's spiritual sensitivity during social gatherings. Their children inherited the family's abilities and were trained from an early age to communicate respectfully with their deceased relatives. My role as guardian of the family's supernatural communications continued for the remainder of my career. I learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when deceased family members were attempting to communicate, and I helped maintain the careful balance between secrecy and utilization of their extraordinary resource. The eastern attic window continues to open during optimal communication periods, and the family council continues to provide guidance for business decisions, relationship choices, and major life transitions. What once seemed like a supernatural curse has revealed itself to be one of the most remarkable blessings that any family could inherit. Years have passed since that winter night when I first witnessed the impossible sight of Edmund Whitmore writing in his candlelit study. Yet I remember every detail with perfect clarity, because some experiences are too extraordinary to fade from memory. The estate never speaks about its secrets. But for those who know how to listen, its silence contains the wisdom of generations.